This conference will now be recorded.
All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the next installment, I guess, of our Brevard Business Community COVID-19 Response Team. I want to take this opportunity to thank our team members as part of this collaboration. It's been great through all of this, working together so closely, and we're thrilled to have the Florida Chamber here today to share their information with us. And we know that you guys will find their presentation absolutely perfect timing and great information for all of us. So I do want to give a shout out to all of our partners. Obviously the four chambers, Titusville, Cocoa Beach, Melbourne, and Greater Palm Bay Chamber of Commerce, as well as the SVDC at Eastern Florida State College, Career Source Brevard, the Economic Development Commission of Florida Space Coast, Groundswell, Melbourne Main Street, the Space Coast Office of Tourism, and our friends at We Venture at FIT. So just real quickly, for those of you that have not been on a webinar with us, this series is being recorded and we will share it with the partner agencies. You'll also get a follow-up email from us with a link to the recording. And if we can get the presentation from the Florida Chamber, we'll be happy to share those slides as well. We will mute everyone on the call, and we ask you to use the chat feature if you have questions. So there's a little chat bubble in your toolbar, and feel free to ask questions. Jennifer, Michael, Nancy, and I will be moderating that chat, and we'll bring those questions forward when the time is right. Our goal is to let our presenters go through all of their slides and discussion points before we open the floor for questioning. But we will, if we see something that's, extremely relevant and we need to interject, we will, but we'll try to be respectful of their ability to give a presentation without interruption. We have an hour and a half set up, although we've been averaging around an hour. So, but it's just to make sure that we don't get bumped off the call. And again, like I said, we will follow up with an email. So with that, I am going to turn the microphone over to my counterpart at the Melbourne Regional Chamber, Michael Ayers. So Michael, do you want to take it away and introduce our speakers?
Thank you, Marcia. Can you hear me? My signal's going in and out, so hopefully it stays in while I'm speaking. Thank you all for joining us this morning. Thanks to all our partners that are involved in this, and especially Marcia, thanks for all you do to get the legwork done to make these happen. It's a pleasure to have with us Mark Wilson and Dr. Jerry Parrish from the Florida Chamber. I've known them for many years, going back to my days in Tallahassee. It's always been a pleasure to work with them, and I can think of nobody I'd rather have leading the chamber at this time in our lives. So, Mark, as most of you know, is the CEO of the Florida Chamber, commonly known as Florida's most influential business advocacy organization. It's the voice of business in Florida, fighting to secure Florida's future through legislative advocacy, grassroots action, political leadership, and research-based solutions to help Florida's competitiveness. Dr. Jerry Parrish is the chief economist at the Florida Chamber, the only in-house economist that I think Mark likes to say of any state chamber. So we're blessed to have him on board in that role. Mark, in addition to serving as the president of the Florida Chamber, serves on the board of directors of Enterprise Florida, Leadership Florida, Florida Chamber, the Florida Chamber Foundation, and the Council of State Chambers. He's also a member of the American Chamber of Commerce Executives, the Florida Association of Chamber Professionals, and the U.S. Chambers Committee of 100. And in addition to all that, he and his team have been working tirelessly with the governor's team up in Tallahassee, pretty much since this pandemic started. I don't know if he's slept much over the last 6 weeks, but we appreciate all the work he's doing to help guide businesses in the response through this pandemic. And we are pleased that as we're now getting ready to reopen based on the governor's announcement yesterday, The Florida Chamber has a framework for recovery. They've been working weekly with chambers around the state. We have a weekly conference, weekly webinar every Tuesday that's filled with lots of great information, much of which we'll go over today. So I think I've said enough. It's just a pleasure to have both Mark and Dr. Parrish here, and I'm going to turn it over to you all now. And thanks for taking time to join us here on the Space Coast.
Well, Michael, and to all of our chamber partners in Brevard County, thank you so much for the invitation. Dr. Parrish and I have been looking forward to this. You know, a lot of innovation comes out of Brevard County, and one of the things we're wondering about is, how did you all know that today, this webinar, would be so perfectly timed? It's almost like you had a launch countdown or something. You know, the governor made the announcement yesterday that we're going to begin the reopening of Florida, and your chambers all work together to somehow get that launch sequence perfect. And so this morning at the Florida Chamber, we had Governor DeSantis's general counsel come over, and we spent about an hour and a half with him. We actually just got off a statewide webinar where he was answering chambers of commerce's questions around Florida and also small companies and big companies about what does this executive order mean? What are we going to be allowed to do? And so, Michael, and to all of our chamber teammates in Brevard, we have put up on the Florida Chamber's website the governor's PowerPoint presentation from yesterday, as well as the frequently asked questions. And we also have a live information system where, as small businesses all over Florida have questions about what are they allowed to do or what are the safety protocols, local chambers of commerce are going to be the key in working with economic development groups, are going to be the absolute key to reopen Florida. And so that's really what I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about, is really getting my top job as president of the Florida Chamber of Commerce right now is to work in close partnership with local chambers throughout Florida as we begin the reopening, the first of 3 phases of reopening Florida. And so what to expect today is I'm going to walk through what we know at the Florida Chamber in terms of White House, in terms of Florida, in terms of what other countries are doing, but mostly what can we do at the county and the city level with businesses to help make sure that we safely and quickly reopen our economy. And that means we need to understand what the guidelines are, we need to understand what the timeframes are, and we need to understand what the consequences are health-wise if we don't get this right. And as Michael said, the Florida Chamber, we're blessed to be the only chamber in the country with a full-time chief economist. And so it's a real blessing. You're going to get to hear from our chief economist, Dr. Jerry Parrish. And what he does every time we do a webinar is he comes up with new data and information. So I'll be seeing it for the first time, just like you're going to be seeing it for the first time. So, and then after you hear from Dr. Parrish, as was indicated earlier by Marcia and Michael, we'll then go to questions after that. So let me just say on the front end, look, we all 22 million Floridians, we're all the same right now. We're all in this together, and we're one big state that's an incredibly diverse state. And so not all counties are opening at the same time, and not all industries are going to have the same ramp, kind of ramp back onto the fast lane. And so that's the right safety protocols. The governor's got it right. And our job is to try to make sure everybody understands rules of the road and how quickly can we get back fully functioning. So next slide. So what I want to do here is really set up that there's a national strategy in place that the CDC and the White House has put together. And then each state, each governor is customizing a plan that has to be in concert with the White House, but then each state has a customized plan. And then here in Florida, we have 412 cities and 67 counties and 34 state agencies. And so where the real rubber is going to meet the road is, can all of us as small, medium, and large businesses, can we work with our 412 cities and our 67 counties to make sure that the Florida implementation of the guidelines is done seamlessly, is done consistently, and is done in accordance with hard health metrics and also the right guidelines. So in terms of what that means, let's go to the next slide here. We're trying to unite the business community in Florida together so that we can all really understand the guidelines and be on the same page. This is one of those, you've got to help a neighbor out. If your small business is next to another small business and maybe you're not in the same industry, get to know them and talk with them about what are you doing to bring customers back in? What are you doing to keep your employees safe? And you could probably learn a lot from each other as we reopen this. So look, I'm not a person who reads PowerPoint slides, and so we will make this deck available to all of your members after this presentation. But what this slide simply says is if Florida's economy, if we were a country, Florida would have the 17th largest economy in the world. And our national strategy was to essentially cause a recession so that we could get through this health scare. And while we don't have a vaccine for the coronavirus, we are learning a lot about how to contain it. And that's got to be job one right now. And so as we shut down the largest economy in the world, which is the U.S. economy, and then we significantly slowed the 17th largest economy in the world, which we all know is Florida, it's going to take a very methodical teamwork approach to restarting this economy. And, if you think about it, we've had huge shocks to consumer demand, and we've had huge shocks to the global supply chain. So you don't turn either one of those back on like a light switch. And so life as we know it's going to be a little different for a while. But this is the old, as I've been saying to the Wall Street Journal and others lately, this is a little bit like that book we read when we were kids about the tortoise and the hare, right? Everybody wants to quickly get back into business again. And the right way to approach this is more along the lines of the hare. Let's be wise. Let's learn from other countries. Let's have each other's back, and let's do it the right way. And if we do it the right way, I think Florida, once again, will be advantaged as the state that got it right. And we won't be suffering some of the same challenges that are going on in New York right now and are certainly going on in places like Singapore. And I'll speak to that in just a minute. So next slide, please. So here is just a picture of what we're referring to, right? So if ever there was a time for us all to be united, look, I realize it's a presidential election year, and I realize that based on someone's, politics, they may like a plan or not like a plan. Business leaders in Florida, especially chambers of commerce, we need to make sure that nowhere in our county is there room for partisan politics right now. This is about the CDC's laid out guidelines, the governor's laid out guidelines, and if you want your county to have a successful reopening, we should band together, cities, counties, chambers of commerce, economic development groups. Let's understand these guidelines. Let's champion them. And let's, in your county, you've got about 600,000 people. And, in the next 10 years, you're going to grow somewhere between 50,000 people and 100,000 people. So you're already working together on third grade reading scores and infrastructure issues. And how can all of Florida help the Space Coast thrive and survive? So we're all already working together in other ways. I'm going to ask you, as the number one ask I have of you today, is please work together and hold each other accountable. What we don't need are 412 different patchworks and guidelines and mandates and regulations, because then businesses will not only never open again, but what will happen is we'll actually make it less safe if we have a bunch of different guidelines from one county to the next or one city to the next. And so just please appreciate and understand the significance of that. Next slide, please. So we talk about what's going on across the country and across the state. And the only reason we put this slide up here is because obviously we're working very closely with Governor DeSantis and with the Surgeon General and with Mary Mayhew, who runs ACA. And the point here is I literally think that Florida, when this is all said and done, Florida is going to be the global model of not only how you save tens of thousands of lives. When you look at the governor's presentation from yesterday that we'll send you later, you'll notice that the decisions that Florida made early on by listening to what the doctors were saying about how to keep people safe, we literally have tens of thousands of cases less than bigger states, than other states that are smaller than us, right? In fact, I think Georgia is going to pass us in a day or two to have more deaths than Florida does. And they're going to have more cases than we do here in another 2 weeks or so. So the point is, Florida got the close down right. And now what we have is an opportunity, because we got it right and we're dealing with a position of strength. Now we have the opportunity to get the restart right as well. Next slide, please. So in terms of what this, let's go to the next slide, please. In terms of what this looks like I want to give you two slides here that I hope everybody watching will gather around and pay very close attention to these next two slides, especially because these are some data slides that talk about what's at stake here, right? So again, if you look at the top section of this slide, this is what Florida looked like pre-COVID, okay? So, 17th largest economy in the world if we were a country. We were creating 1 out of every 11 new American jobs all the way back to 2015. Think about that for a minute. 900 new residents moved to Florida every day, 7 days a week. But what's important is we grow by 900 people a day. I misspoke. I apologize. We grow by 900 people a day. 810 come from another country or from another state. So think about what that means in a COVID environment right now. And then also think about visitors to Florida. We had almost 130 million visitors last year from another state or another country. 14 million of those visitors came from another country. How many of those countries are hotspots? When will we be able to bring them back again? For example, I'm a big road racing fan, and I want to see IMSA be able to race again, things like the Rolex 24. Well, guess what? Many of those teams are European-based teams, and they can't get their cars and they can't get their teams to Florida. And so, this is a global situation, and the Florida response has to be a little different. But look on the bottom here. On the bottom left, I really want everybody to kind of get level set here on Florida's a very different state. We have 22 million people, and we do have the 20th most diverse economy in the United States. But look where our tax base comes from. We don't have a personal income tax. 20% of the tax receipts that we have for general revenue or sales taxes and so forth come from tourism, hotels, restaurants, and so forth. So as we essentially close those down for a couple of months, you can only imagine what's going to happen to Florida's tax base. And that's not good for local government. It's not good for Florida either. And then if you look, almost 80% of general revenue comes from sales tax and use tax. So automobiles, as an example, are the number one source of sales tax in Florida. And you just saw Ford Motor Company said they lost $2 billion last quarter. So you start putting these numbers together, and we have a real interesting situation on our hands. Also, more than 1 in 5 Floridians is a senior, and we know that that's a vulnerable population when it comes to COVID. And most states don't have to deal with this. We're about to enter hurricane season, where we're all used to sheltering. Go to the local school, go to shelter, everybody band together. We're not going to be able to do that. And so not only are we trying to get everybody back to work safely and back to school safely, we also have an issue of hurricane preparedness and safety there. Most important thing I can share with you on this slide are the two different scenarios relative to what's going to happen with our economy. And don't worry about all the numbers here. Just look at the shape of the graph, right? So 2 months ago, almost everyone thought that this was going to be a V-shaped situation. We're going to quickly shut down and quickly start up again. It's now looking less and less from a national perspective that that's the case. And so what we're hoping as chambers of commerce is that this is a V-shaped recovery, that we kind of went into it fast, and that we're going to come out of it in the next couple of quarters. The most optimistic perspective that I've seen around the country is that we would be back to pre-COVID levels by the end of the year or Q1 2021. It's the next scenario that I worry more about, though, and that's this U-shaped scenario. If we argue with each other, and we have 412 cities with 412 guidelines, if we don't follow the White House and the governor's guidelines, we could end up like Singapore, which I'll show you in a second, where we end up with the secondary spread being worse than the first one. And if that happens, folks, Florida's economy won't recover for a long time. It's really up to the business community to lead right now and to do this the right way. And that's what we're spending our time on. Next slide. I want you to pay attention here to, so there's about 185 countries that have been impacted by COVID. And while that's terrible, the advantage Florida has is there's a host of countries that are 4 to 8 weeks ahead of the United States. So I'm often asked by people, what other states are we looking to for models? Well, I'm not looking at any other states for models because they're all going through the same general time frame we are. We're looking at other countries. So if you look at Singapore and South Korea and Japan and Germany and Spain and Italy and territories like Hong Kong, they are 4 to 8 weeks ahead of us. And what I want you to look at here on this slide is the middle portion. That would be called Singapore. So Singapore is a small country, granted, 6 million people, but Singapore was down to only 3 new cases a day in the entire country. And so they started easing restrictions, right? That sort of feels familiar, right? That's about what we're about to do. They started going back to school, they started going back to work, they started going back to normal. And what happened in a very short period of time is they actually had a worse spread of the virus than where they were before. So for a second time, their whole country shut down businesses again, they shut down schools again, they restricted international travel, and they restricted all group meetings. The only group meeting you could have is with family, right? So this is what some other countries are going through, and I'm begging you, we have to get this right. And the governor's laid out exactly the right healthcare-driven metrics. And all of Florida except Miami-Dade and Brevard are going to be able to reopen under a phased-in approach starting on Monday. And so I've only got a few more slides. Let's go to the next one. We talked about the national guidelines, and we shared this with every local chamber in Florida about 3 weeks ago. When the White House came out with their gating criteria, we knew that every county was going to have to meet 5 out of the 6 parameters here. Everywhere does, okay? And so the good news for Brevard is you've met that gating criteria. And as a business community in Brevard, I would ask you stay focused on this. Don't let there be a relapse here, because if we fall back out of compliance with these guidelines, then we're likely in a scenario where we go backwards instead of forwards. And again, this is very clear. There's 3,007 or so counties in the country. Everybody has to work with the same standards, and we should embrace them, and it'll allow us to go faster. Okay, next slide, please. So what we've created is an open source framework that local business leaders can use to align together on a common framework to work with mayors, to work with county commissions, to work with regional groups to say, hey, how can we all get on the same page, not only with the CDC and the governor, but how can we get on a local page locally? So, for example, some counties have ports and international airports, and some counties have universities. And, Tuag and Baghdad and Milton are very different places than Fort Lauderdale or Brevard. And so we have to be able to use the uniqueness of a local area, but also at the same time figure out common guidelines. And so all we're simply saying here is what a time for local chambers and EDCs to lead the recovery efforts, right? The why here is pretty important, right? Not everywhere in Florida looks like the other place in Florida, so we need to customize this for our local efforts. And then obviously safety's got to be everybody's number one priority. Think about the Singapore example I just shared with you. We just can't let that happen in Florida. Next, please. So in terms of things that might be here to stay, I'm asked, again, in a lot of media interviews, I'm asked, when do I think Florida is going to go back to normal? And we would probably be better off if we just said never, right? Because we may eventually get back to what life used to be like, but for the foreseeable future, I think what you're looking at here on the screen, everything from, telehealth to, taking temperatures of employees as they come to work, not just once a day, but every time they come in and out of the building. If you look at what other countries are doing with air travel, it's very common in the countries that are 4 to 8 weeks ahead for them to take your temperature when you get to the airport. You would wear a mask from the time you enter the airport until the time you leave the airport on the other end. And then they take your temperature a second time before you board the airplane. And this is what they're doing in other countries. And so, we're the freest country in the world. And so, we're going to have this balance between, the ultimate protection of our safety and health and what kind of freedoms do we want. And again, we're all going to have to work together on that. Next slide. So in terms of, where we are in Florida right now, and again, every local chamber in Florida knows this and is already using a version of this, but there's really 4 phases in dealing with COVID. The first was what we called relief. And think of Congress has already invested $5 trillion of all of our tax dollars in providing relief, unemployment insurance, dollars for hospitals, dollars for government, unemployment insurance, loans for small businesses. And my guess is there's going to need to be a lot more of that. But that's this relief piece, right? Where we're moving into now that the governor announced yesterday is a restart piece. How do we restart safely this economy? And that's what we're talking about today. After we start this phase, the next phase will be how can Brevard County and all of Florida get back to where we were before COVID? And in the process of that, we have an opportunity regionally to then start asking ourselves, hey, because of COVID and what we've learned, can we reimagine what the future from an economic development standpoint might look like in our regions and in our state? So these are the 4 phases we're going to. Today, we begin the restart phase, and really that's all we're talking about today. So next slide, please. So what we need to do here is, I already talked about partisan politics has no place in COVID. In fact, I would ask all of you to adopt a rule in your whole county that, if anybody wants to talk partisan politics, they can be invited to leave the conversation. And once COVID is settled, they can join you again. But between now and then, there's just no room for partisan politics. You're not going to hear it from me, and I hope nobody hears it from you. I think this is my last slide, but I want to explain at the local level all of the research that we've done when you study the White House, what the governor's been working on, and the uniqueness of Florida. There's an open source common framework here, similar to the 6 pillars that we use in Florida, similar to the Florida 2030 blueprint. There's a common frame here that if cities and counties and chambers and economic developers and small business coalesced around these 6 conversations, you're going to give yourself common language and a fighting chance to get back in business soon, right? So the first one is public health. I think everybody knows what this means. Hospitals, healthcare leaders, making sure that the White House gating criteria continues to move in the right direction. And if the business community would support all of your healthcare providers locally, giving them what they need, whether it's extra masks or whether it's undivided attention, and try to adhere, you're going to be in good shape. The Safe Business Restart Committee, if you think of the 20 or so different industry sectors we have in Florida, everybody has their own sort of unique way of getting back into business, whether it's restaurants open at 25% capacity or retails can be at 25% capacity. We're eventually going to be opening our beaches. We're going to be able to go back to the barber and the hairstylist again. Gyms are going to reopen. And as we do that, there's nobody better than a group of local leaders to be able to explain what the guidelines are in your community. Every zip code matters, folks. In Florida, we have 22 million residents, and we're growing, but we also have 871,000 kids living in poverty in our state. And so keep in mind, people who are in poverty are a vulnerable population right now, and let's not forget about them. Let's have our chambers work together to make sure that those zip codes, those kids, those zip codes are getting what they need to get through this. We don't need more people in poverty as a result of this. And the rest of us who have the ability to do it, if we just focus on where those zip codes are and where those kids are, and we get them the food they need, the education they need, the health care they need, Florida's it's going to make a big difference. Regulatory and Policy Committee. I'm the national chair of the National Association of State Chambers, and I also serve on the leadership of the U.S. Chamber, and we have 3 meetings a week nationally. My number one concern right now is an argument at the local level where everybody's going to feel like we need more mandates and more litigation and more regulation. That's exactly the opposite thing that we need. What we need, we already have it from the White House and the governor. Now what we need is everybody to adopt the same speed limit, the same standards, and let's move forward as fast as we can along the same set of guidelines. Also, workforce training and retraining. Think about it. Remote work is going to be here to stay for about a quarter of the people that are in it right now. Social distancing is going to be here for a while. And, we believe that in a post-COVID environment, Florida can be the best place in the world. If you're going to remote work, why not remote work in Brevard County, right? And so be thinking about what does retraining work with? Work with your colleges, work with your local training providers, and work with small businesses. And then finally, we talked about reimagining, right? So we're going to be different after this. So start working right now on what does the future of the region and the future of the state look like. There's no time like now to start thinking about, how do we bring supply chains and manufacturers back into Florida? Right now, Florida has the 12th highest number of manufacturing jobs in the United States. Our goal is to have the 5th highest number of manufacturing jobs. And I think everybody on this call today knows that supply chains, there's going to be a cry and a call from Americans to bring some of our supply chains back into the United States again. Well, what's Brevard County doing to own that, right? What manufacturing can we bring back into the United States and specifically into Brevard County? These are the kinds of things that we work on in a reimagining scenario. So with that said, what I would like to do, next slide, please, is just a couple of ground rules as you think about this. Remember, every industry is going to be different. So restaurants are going to be different than retailers, are going to be different than manufacturers. So let's settle those differences and support each other. Keep in mind, you have businesses in Brevard that not only were not hurt by this, but are literally on fire. They can't hire enough people. Their businesses are doing great. Right down the road from a business who had to lay off 1,000 people. And so this has been a very uneven situation for everybody. And just remember, we're all neighbors and friends. We need to help each other everywhere that we can. And keep in mind, small businesses are the ones who need the biggest help right now. 52% of all potential job interruptions in Florida from COVID are from large companies, but that means 48% of those jobs are in small businesses, and they need our help right now more than ever. So with that said, let's go forward. And I'm going to introduce to you now our chief economist, Dr. Jerry Parrish. He and I are on, I don't even know how many webinars every week. We have a couple today. We have at least 3 tomorrow. And it's just an honor and a privilege to get to work with this guy. And so I'm going to turn it over to our chief economist of the Florida Chamber Foundation. And then what we'll do after Jerry completes, as Marcia and Michael said, then we'll go right into Q&A if we have some. Okay, Jerry?
Thanks, Mark, and I appreciate y'all having me on the call today. I do like to come down to Brevard County. I was able to, not that long ago, stand up on stage and tell a group I was speaking to that, when Florida was creating manufacturing jobs over the past 3 years at that time, at about 2.8 times the U.S. rate. That was the same time Brevard County was creating 1 out of every 6 of those jobs in the state of Florida. And I know you guys can't wait to get back to that situation. I want to talk today about data, and I want to talk about some misperceptions out there. And of course, I want to show something new that Mark has never seen, like he said. And so we'll see that here in a second. But I want to talk to you about the data. I've seen some of the headlines out there, and I've had this question ever since the governor made his announcement. I got more texts and emails and calls. Is this a reasonable thing for Florida to be opening up? All I see is negative news on the national news and my local paper. Let's talk about what this data is and what it means. First of all, if you've signed up for the Florida Chamber email every day, you see a map just like this. We bring it out every morning, shows you how many cases you have in your county, what the numbers are, how many people are tested, what the positive percent rate is, number of deaths, those kind of things. I want you to think about this. This is a cumulative number. It doesn't go down. So take a look at your county. I know some of you may be even from a county besides Brevard. Take a look at your county. That's the total number to date. Nobody's following people around, taking them off the list once they've been cured. So I think we need to start really thinking about more, what's the recent part of these numbers? And if you look at the White House guidance, you have to understand that you're supposed to have a negative, trend over the past 14 days. I'll talk about that in a second. I want you to key in on that percent positive. Right now, over this past 60 days, we've had cases in Florida. 8.8% of all of them have tested positive. Well, that's actually not very high. You can see that we've tested 375,000 people in this state, and certainly that's increasing. Availability of tests is higher. Keep in mind, it's not the same around all parts of the state, and I'll show you that in a minute. Keep also in mind, this is a heat map. You can see how dark it is in southeast Florida as far as the high numbers. You got to understand that nearly 60% of all the cases, it's literally 59.8% of all the cases in Florida have happened in the southeastern three counties of Palm Beach, Broward, and Miami-Dade. So it got a different, that's a different thing. And you saw Governor DeSantis exclude them from the phase 1 opening. However, the good news is they're getting better. What I want you to think about is the percent of tests that are testing positive, that 8.8%. Well, that's over the 60 days. Let's take a look at what's happened over the past couple of weeks. This is actually, it's a 5-day moving average, because within 5 days you should be able to get your test back. And so I think this is the best way to match the number of tests. And so what you can see now is we're testing below 6% positive now. Certainly it was high. It was 14, it was 13, it was 11. Those kind of numbers back around April the 1st or April the 2nd, when it looked like Florida had peaked in number of new cases. And that's actually what's happened here. We are past the peak. That's one of the things that we had to look at. So, what I want you to think about too is every county is different in this metric. So what I did a few days ago is I plotted the percent positive by county. And at the time, Florida's average was 9.0. I do this once a week. Just for your information, we're about to put this information on the Florida scorecard, where you'll be able to see it. We're working on getting the tiles up. They should be up there in the next day or so. But you can see how low a percentage that you guys have. It's actually gone down in Brevard County, the more tests and the lower positive. But, so I think that's good news. Now, you see a couple of rural counties up there who are having high positive test rates. That may well be a function of a limited number of tests. They're only giving them to the most sick people in that county. That could be part of that, and it also could be that there's a whole lot of cases in there. But what I think you're seeing is, while we have, passed the peak, I think the governor was very reasonable, deciding to open up most of the state of Florida. I thought he was very conservative with what he did, and I really believe that's going to help us in the long run keep the number of cases down in the state of Florida. Well, one of the things that has been so different as an economist of this effect on the economy of any other thing has been the suddenness that it has brought on. I want to show you, I calculated, and this is current as today. First confirmed case in Brevard was March 17th. That was 15 days later than the first total case in Florida, which was on March the 2nd. So this literally in every county is the number of days since they've had their first positive confirmed case. So you can see you guys are a little behind the curve. But I want to show you a little more about how I think they're going to calculate things when they start to open up even more. I think what's important is that number of new cases and put into perspective. So you can see this thing has only been around a little while, but what kind of effect has it had on the economy? Well, you've seen the initial claims numbers. This was current as of yesterday. I just saw a number for Florida. I haven't verified it, but it was another 400,000 plus cases in the state of Florida. That's going to put us at about 1.5 million initial unemployment claims over the past 5 weeks. Now, I wanted to show you what a normal week this time of the year has been since 2003. Remember that great recession thing that we had? In a week, 24,592 claims. So I keep seeing the reports in the newspaper about how Florida was unprepared for all the rash of unemployment claims. Well, of course they were. No state in the country, can go from doing 6 or 7 or 5,000 claims a week to 70 and then 200 and then 500. I think these numbers will start dropping. I know the DEO has added a bunch of capacity, but I don't think it would be reasonable to think that we could be ready for something like this when the actual trend had been so low. And this is happening all over the country. How many of those are going to turn into lost jobs? Well, quite a few of them, but some of these, of course, somebody has filed the first week and they didn't get a response or didn't know if theirs took, so they filed again. So there's some duplicates in here, and I know DEO is working on, getting those done and getting money out to people who deserve to be paid the unemployment claims. Now, I want to go back to the claims in your county and just show you where you are. Would you qualify for the 14? Well, the entire state of Florida does, so you can bet that you have too. But the next slide shows just a cumulative number of cases. Now you're at 270. That was updated yesterday. That's not a high number in the terms of cases. You saw the heat map at all. But let's look at the new cases. Have there been any spikes? We've seen some of that in some of the cases here, so I'm adding them. The highest spike you had was 19 cases in one day. A lot of times that happens because somebody goes in and tests an entire retirement home, or the private lab send in a bunch of tests that day, and so it looks like you've had a big spike. Trust me, have not been any. But what I like to show really is the 14-day moving average of your cases. Is it going up or is it going down? That's really, I think, the key metric you need to keep an eye on going forward. Here's what it looks like when I add that. You peaked out at 10.2 a day. I will tell you almost every county except a few rural counties in Florida would gladly take that number. Now the latest, and this is the 14-day moving average, is 6.9 cases. So I think pretty confident in saying Brevard certainly is within the qualification of declining number of new cases in the next 14 days. I know you guys have hospital capacity out there, and so I think I feel pretty comfortable with saying that it's been a good decision on the governor's part to open Florida. I believe we'll move into phase 2 before too long, and as things will start get back to normal. That's what I wanted to show. I wanted to turn it over to Mark. I know we'll be available for questions, but I want to let him go ahead now and make a couple other comments. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So Michael and Marcia and the whole team there, obviously we're mostly looking forward to trying to do some Q&A. I assume there are, but I think just as one big chamber community, we, the Florida Chamber team, we send out an email every single morning. Comes out from me, and we committed 2 months ago that we wanted Chambers of Commerce to be in the best position to be able to provide daily updates. And so if there's anybody in the county that is interested in getting the very latest information, it's just super simple to go to the website and sign up for that. Happy to do that as long as we're all in a COVID environment. And then finally, next slide, please. Finally, I know that, safety, I just wanted to say a word about safety. The Florida Chamber has a safety division. In fact, we're the Florida chapter of the National Safety Council. And as many companies are thinking about safety protocols and how do we safely go back to work again, we've actually spun up a customized to Florida set of online safety trainings for employees all over Florida. And so, if you already have that taken care of and your company's already thinking about it, great. If you need some help there, or you need something that you don't see, our goal is to try to have every company in Florida safely return employees and customers. So with that said, I know Dr. Jerry Parrish should be happy to try to answer any questions.
Thanks. Okay, so the first one that I see is there any idea how long phase 1 will last?
Take that.
You want me to?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, okay, sure. So number one, that will be, much of that is set by the White House. And so when the White House guidelines came out, the White House guidelines said that in order for sort of the launch sequence to start, the 5 of those 6 health metrics needed to be met. And so I think the reason Governor DeSantis decided to announce yesterday that we're going to be beginning the reopening phase Monday is Florida has met those criteria from the White House. If you then follow, again, it's on our website if anybody wants to download the White House criteria. The White House is doing things essentially in 2-week tranches. So once we go back, which is Monday the 4th, as long as we continue to follow White House guidelines, which I would expect that we would, then that's a 2-week phase. And so as long as the numbers continue to move in the positive direction, what the White House gating criteria says is that 2 weeks later, as long as the numbers are right, we then would move into phase 2. And in phase 2, you start to open up things and relax a little bit more. Things like daycare centers and summer camps and things like that will be able to open back up again. And then if 2 weeks later the numbers continue pointing in the right direction, then we would move into phase 3, which is where there's even fewer restrictions on travel. Larger groups can start to get together. So, folks, I don't think this is a months and months long issue. I think that Broward and Dade and Palm Beach are not reopening on Monday. That's where we have a significant number of cases there. But I don't think it'll be a matter of too many more days or weeks before they're sort of following in your lead. So if we all follow the White House guidelines, if I were a mayor or a county commissioner anywhere in Florida, I would be looking at the CDC and White House guidelines, and I would be using that time frame, and I would be applying it to what Governor DeSantis put out yesterday. It is crystal clear. There's like no ambiguity on this if we all follow the same guidelines. So I think it's a matter of 2-week increments. Now, it should be noted the governor, decided to not open movie theaters, for example, and barber shops and hair salons. And his thinking was, Florida's done things right. And, if we wait another week or two and let this thing die down a little bit more, then we can really come back with a vengeance. And so that's what his general counsel talked about this morning. And whether you like it or not, that's kind of where we're heading, is safety first. I hope that answers that question.
It does. Thank you. Would you mind speaking a little bit to the difference in processing of claims at DEO? I know that there's a real pain point for sole proprietors, contract, gig employee, gig economy kind of stuff for the ability to be able to apply for and receive unemployment. Is there?
So
go ahead.
Yeah. So I think, Marshall, what we'll try to do here, I'll answer that, and then I'll see if Dr. Parrish has a perspective, because we sort of cover that from 2 different vantage points. In my role as the national chair of all the state chambers, and also in working closely with the governor's office and obviously tens of thousands of companies around Florida, there's so much confusion around this around the country right now. First of all, Marcia, let me lay the predicate here for a minute. So if you're 1099, if you're a gig worker, an independent contractor, if you're an Uber driver or any kind of a 1099 worker, what I would first want us to establish is you were not paying into the unemployment insurance system in the first place. You didn't have an employer that was paying into an unemployment insurance. So in other words, we're giving insurance payouts to people who never paid into the insurance system before. So that's the first thing that we need to understand, is this would literally be like you have car insurance, your neighbor got in an accident in her car, and now you're going to pay for her accident with your insurance. Okay, understand, that's literally what we're doing right now. So a lot of the sort of confusion in the distribution of dollars is we're paying people who were never covered and never paid insurance before with a system that was designed for people who were covered. So I think it's a really great national policy. I mean, think about it. In America, entrepreneurship and starting your own business is sort of what our country's founded on. And so figuring out when Congress wanted to help give relief, remember the first R is relief. They wanted to give relief to people who were in a 1099 situation, but they had to do it from the general treasury rather than using the unemployment insurance system. And so from a federal standpoint, we've opened up an entire can of worms, Marshall, not the least of which is there are many people who, against the wishes of our Senator Rick Scott and Senator Marco Rubio, there are many people who are going to make more money on unemployment than they would have at their employer. And so now we have this second crisis order effect where small businesses are ready for people to come back to work, and we have people going, oh, I'm not ready to come back to work. I'm making more money on unemployment. So, in our country, remember what Winston Churchill said, right? You can always count on America to do the right thing after they've tried everything else. So the latest idea in Congress that's floating around is to get these people to come back to work early. Remember, they get paid through July, right? So in order to get them to come back to work early, now they're looking at putting as much as an $1,800 bonus in play to get people to come off of unemployment to come back to work. So Marcia, the problem's actually worse than the person asking the question. It's actually worse. And so we've got a problem on our hands, but we're a country who values work, and for people who want to work and get back to work, this is the greatest country in the world. And yes, there's some unintended consequences, but the system in Tallahassee has largely been put together now to handle the kind of volume that we have. I can tell you again, in my role as national chair, every state in the country was dealing with this. Every state was overwhelmed. I think that Florida's well on its way now to being able to handle this. But the problems that we're going to have on unemployment go beyond the system. Now we have philosophical debates, and it's a presidential year, and Congress is going to have to fix this, and they have two diametrically opposed philosophies of how to fix it. Okay? Like, for example, I think we need a personal income tax on trial lawyers to help pay for all of this stuff. But that's one man's opinion, and I'm probably not going to be successful with it. But again, everybody's got an opinion, including me.
All right.
Jerry, you got anything you want to add? Nope. Okay. Jerry says we've covered that one enough.
Okay. I'm going to ask this question, but before I do, I'm going to ask at some point if Dr. Parrish would talk a little bit about diversified economies, because one of the things that I saw in some of your presentations was, and heard from you, was about the communities who have a broader, diverse base of industry, have the opportunities to sort of lead the way for recovery. And that was one thing I didn't see in this presentation. So I'd love for you to speak to that if you would.
Yeah, thanks for that. That's a great question. When I'm out speaking to business groups, I often ask them, we're in the same room together. I can, poke at them and make sure they answer sometimes. Ask them how industry diversified they think Florida is. And it's a really common answer to hear, oh, we're 35th or 40th or 45th, when one is the best and 50th is the worst. Well, it's the truth is different. Right now, Florida has the 20th most diversified economy in state economy in the entire country. And, with our Florida 2030 blueprint goals, we want to be in the top 12. So, we've been on the way. We've made good progress. The Palm Bay Melbourne MSA is highly ranked in this. And I believe it's certainly because, you've got a strong manufacturing base that not a lot of other areas have. And so I think probably what you saw me say is, use this two things as a proxy for who's going to do the best and who's going to do the worst through this. And on the earlier presentations, I would show two things. Where is your metropolitan statistical area now? And I believe y'all are second or third. It does vary, but I think you're probably second right now. And the other one was, what is the percentage of private sector jobs in your county and in your region that are leisure and hospitality jobs? Because it was too early to tell how many jobs we'd actually lose, but I want you to use that as a proxy because that certainly has shown nationally it's been nearly 2 out of 3 jobs in the initial unemployment claims that have come from leisure and hospitality. Surprisingly, in Florida, the early numbers I saw, it was only about 30%, but I can almost guarantee you those will climb when we get more recent data. And certainly, speaking of that, we're going to get new jobs data on May the 15th. We'll get the April jobs number. That'll be the first real serious look at the amount of jobs we've lost. But I believe you guys have a great diversification over there of your economy. You have a lower leisure and hospitality than a lot of places in this state. And so I believe Brevard County is going to be one of the first to recover when this thing really ramps up and people feel comfortable, getting out again and going back to a little more normal situation.
Thank you, Dr. Parrish.
That's really good news. We appreciate that so much. And speaking to manufacturing, can you elaborate a little bit, both of you or whoever wants to take it, on the supply chain changes that you expect? I know we've talked a lot more about domestic manufacturing, but what changes do you forecast for importing and exporting raw goods or food supply? Also keeping in mind that we have a port here and we have a port commissioner on the line with us too. So that is who is asking.
You want me to take it?
Go ahead.
I'm really excited about the opportunities for Florida as far as reshoring our supply chain. I've said this multiple times on many of these webinars. I will guarantee you Florida and the U.S. will not let themselves get in the situation we're in, where we're dependent on some foreign country for, simple things like masks, personal protective equipment. You can extend that to pharmaceuticals and many, many other things. And one of the things, here's how I got a job at the Florida Chamber. I'll tell this little quick story. I was actually working at another place and got invited to work with the Florida Chamber Foundation on the Trade and Logistics 2 report. And that was really my first real exposure to the Chamber and the Chamber Foundation. And I saw what they were doing, and I saw that they had the Chamber behind them to help get things actually done. But what I learned in that report has always stuck with me. The key thing I learned from working on that report was about half of Florida's trains, trucks, containers, ships, everything leave Florida empty. And we bring in a lot of consumer goods, but we don't ship out near as much goods. We do ship, export a lot of agriculture and different things, fertilizer, phosphates and things like that. But when you calculate the freight savings, the inbound freight savings we could have to balance that, let's say we had manufactured goods, being put in those containers to leave the state, our inbound freight rates would come down. Our manufacturers would be more competitive. Our consumers would save money as far as these consumer goods. And I really thought, and I learned that from that report, and still think that is our best way to be globally competitive. Not just for manufacturers, but for consumers as well. And I believe that this is our opportunity to really take back manufacturing from other states. I think you'll see people trying it all over the country. But, when I talk about Brevard County growing that, 1 out of every 6 manufacturing jobs in a state that's growing manufacturing jobs at nearly 3 times the U.S. rate, you guys are front and center, and it's your opportunity right now to take.
Yeah, and let me, it's such a great question. This is Mark Wilson again. Let me just add to that. Jerry's right. The Florida Chamber Foundation is about to work on the Trade and Logistics 3.0 report. And this looks to, like I said, if Florida was a country, we'd be the 17th largest economy in the world. Our goal is to be the 10th largest economy in the world by 2030. And manufacturing is one of our 39 avenues of how we're going to get there. And so in your region, in your county anyway, imagine if every business and every mayor and every city council and county commissioner knew the statistic that Jerry was talking about relative to your port. What percentage of the containers, coming in are coming in full versus leaving empty? And we've all rented cars one way or taken a one-way flight, and we know that it's exponentially more expensive to do stuff one way. So if you want more jobs and more economic diversification, figure out how to fill up every single one of those ships and trucks that are leaving Brevard County. And if that became a local imperative of your county commission and of your cities and of every small business, what the goal here is, let's make more in our county. Let's move more through the county. And if you do that, you're going to multiply the impacts of taking advantage of international customers. And keep in mind, 95% of the world's customers live outside the United States. And Florida is so uniquely positioned from a geography standpoint for Doug Wheeler and the Florida Ports Council and all 15 ports to just fully take advantage of this. And then finally, in terms of these global supply chain networks, I want to caution everybody here. There's going to be a presidential election race call for bringing all supply chains back into the United States. And that may be a great idea one day. But folks, this is we're in a global supply chain situation. So just think about your iPhone, for example. 90% of your iPhone is made outside the United States, but 90% of the value is actually generated inside the United States. And so moving global supply chains back into the United States is going to take somewhere between 2 and 4 years. And that would be a pretty rapid pace to bring global supply chains back. So the question is, are the conditions right in Brevard County? Would clean manufacturers from Germany and Singapore and Japan, when they build their next plant, is the only place in the world to build it Brevard County? Are you so friendly to manufacturers that nobody would go anywhere else? I mean, that's the question to be asking right now.
Great, thank you, thank you. We also have the head of our Career Source organization, Career Source Brevard, with us, and she wanted to make sure that she shared that the reemployment assistance claims have largely been in healthcare industry, and then of course in accommodations and food service. And so her question is your opinion on the comeback, since that seems to be the largest sector impacted here locally. Do you think healthcare is going to bounce back faster than accommodations, or do you have any insight into what you think that that looks like for those particular industry sectors?
Sure, I've got thoughts, Jerry. Do you have any you want to start with?
Let me take the healthcare one. What you're seeing in the healthcare job loss is mainly dentist office and those people involved in that kind of stuff. I think you're going to see that come back pretty quickly. Leisure and hospitality certainly is going to take people feeling comfortable traveling again. But I think you'll see them start to uptick now with the restaurants starting to reopen with table seating, those kind of things. It will start. We've gotten some really good news on some of the drug treatments out there that may sound really promising right now. If those come in quickly and that's a good option for people, I think you'll see it quicker. Mark, you got any other comments?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mentioned earlier, we put America in a recession, to protect ourselves from this. And again, there's no vaccine. So whether we made the right calls or the wrong calls doesn't matter at this point. In the healthcare industry, Jerry's right, from ophthalmologists to dentists, but also elective surgeries, right? We basically closed down many of our hospital rooms to make room for this onslaught that everybody thought was coming that never came. And so hospitals have been losing tens of millions of dollars, basically we've asked them to make room for everybody. And so, a lot of people have lost their jobs. I think healthcare is going to come back very, very quickly. We need healthcare. And I think now that the governor's opened up elective surgeries again, and dentists can operate, ophthalmologists can operate, I think you're going to begin to see on Monday sort of that rebuilding there. People will be called back to work again. In terms of hospitality and hotels and restaurants, you saw the governor let all of them, most of them. So we're not going to have, some of them won't open, but restaurants and hotels will at a 25% capacity on restaurants. There's no limitation on hotels right now. They can actually have 100% occupancy. I think the issue is going to be consumers. Look, we're all consumers, and an experiment for you to do over the next week is, call your parents, call your neighbors, call your coworkers, and ask them, hey, if you could go back to a hotel, a restaurant next week, would you? And under what conditions? And so I think there's going to be a lot of people who can't wait to go out to eat again, or go take a vacation, to a city next door or a county next door. The question is, when will consumers feel like it's safe to do it again? And so there will be, things like I mentioned earlier, travel from Europe and from other hot spots. We don't know when the White House will open all of that back up again. It really depends on hot spots on their end, and that's going to impact us. But I think you're going to see healthcare come back very quickly starting next week. And I think you're going to start to see restaurants come back over the next 2 weeks. And then if we meet the gating criteria, I'm sure it'll go to maybe 50% the next week, and then maybe 75 or the one after that, a couple weeks after that. So we're going to get there, but we're really at the mercy of what consumers do. at this point, which is why it's so important that mayors and county commissioners and local businesses work in concert with Governor DeSantis to make sure that we're not sending confusing messages to people that we need in our stores and in our restaurants and in our hotels.
Okay. There's a little bit of discussion going on about accuracy of the numbers that are reported. I think both on unemployment, job numbers, and but also then some question about cases, number of cases being reported. Do you guys have any comment on the confidence in the numbers that you're, that the sources that you're getting the numbers that you shared for this presentation with? I don't know if you have any comments on that.
Yeah, I'll let Jerry talk about that.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of talk.
Sorry, go ahead.
We're using the numbers, and it's listed under the slide from the official numbers from the Florida Department of Health. They update those every day. Now they've done it do it by every morning by 11 o'clock. Is what they say. They're updated. I feel pretty confident in those. I'm sure that in any data situation where you got numbers moving across the state of Florida, there's some mistakes in there, but I think overall that's a really good number. I also feel pretty confident about the initial unemployment claims. I think DEO, especially the last 3 or 4 weeks, has been as transparent as they can. You may not know this. They've started putting out initial unemployment claims by county. Now, they were a couple of weeks behind last I looked. They had just gotten the website up. I don't know how close to current they are, but they're doing it by county and by industry. And, like I said, when they, as they go through those and get those current, and then as we see May the 15th, when we see those job numbers come out, we're really going to have a good picture of what's going on and where in the state of Florida. But that's the numbers I'm using, and I feel confident in those.
Yeah, I would add too, this is Mark Wilson. I feel very confident in the numbers. The question is, remember, this is a virus that you could be asymptomatic, right? You can have this and not know it. And so to me, the numbers are accurate. The question is how many people have already had it and how many people have it and don't know it. That's a bigger wild card to me than the numbers that we're looking at.
Thank you. Can you talk a little bit about, we have a question about what kind of PPE will be available to private employers. Do you see what do you see on that picture about availability? I know that there's been conversations here, at least locally, about the availability of PPE for healthcare and frontline workers and those kinds of things. Do you have any insight onto how we're going to make sure that we've got the availability of that for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, first of all, the priority has to be to healthcare workers, right? People on the front lines there. There's now beginning to be, in most parts of Florida, I certainly don't want to advertise everywhere, there's beginning to be a pretty good supply there for the healthcare field. The governor, when the governor announced the reopening again, there really are no mandates for PPEs in many places. I talked to the president of Office Depot just this week, and what you're going to see is stores that didn't used to carry PPEs are now going to be carrying PPEs. Again, back to sort of American entrepreneurship, right? So I think you're going to see the stores that have the ability to do bulk purchasing and contract directly with manufacturers. I also think, you saw companies like Lamborghini, who make some of the best cars in the world. They stopped making cars and started making PPEs. And so, again, leave it up to the ingenuity of companies. Look, this is that issue I mentioned at the beginning of the call. There was a mass disruption in supply chain. And, for example, racing I talked about, right? One reason we can't go back racing is we stopped making racing tires. So, we can't race because we need another 30 days to start making tires again. Same thing's going to be true. The supply of PPEs globally, was really focused in 1 or 2 places. and now we need to spread that out across where the need is. The CDC has put out guidelines, right? So, you actually can make your own mask and still meet CDC guidelines. And so that's what a lot of small businesses have started doing, is if they can't purchase them somewhere, they've started making their own. And that's probably what it's going to be like for a little while. But I would fully expect, just like our grocery stores, everybody knew there was one aisle in the grocery store that there was never anything in for a little while, and now it's restocked again. Same thing's going to happen with PPEs.
Great. What about liability of businesses related to opening up, following guidelines, but opening up, and the risk there? Is there sort of, I know you've talked about common framework, but are you going to see a common standard as far as precautions and protocol procedures for small businesses, so that they have some basis for, liability,
So Marcia, I really appreciate that, whoever asked that question. So as president of Florida's Chamber of Commerce, there's only a few things that are keeping me up at night right now. And this explosion in frivolous and predatory lawsuits against small and local businesses is one that's keeping me up right now. So keep in mind, in a pre-COVID environment, Florida had the 5th worst legal climate in the United States, according to the Institute for Legal Reform. And look, think about it. When you drive around any community in Florida, we have more billboards, saying sue someone than any other state or country in the world, right? And so this was a pre-COVID problem. Now you add COVID into the mix, and most trial lawyers are going to assume that they can get away with saying, oh, you must have contracted COVID from your employer, right? And so now we're going to have all these gotcha lawsuits against small businesses, where a small business, is going to either settle or have to prove that they didn't, create a condition where this could happen. We've talked to the governor about this. We're in communication with Mitch McConnell, the head of the Senate. Congress is talking about lawsuit reform right now. Our state's talking about it. Our Speaker of the House, Jose Oliva, was on the governor's executive team on the task force, and he made a comment about it. The lieutenant governor made a comment about it. Senator Jeff Brandes made a comment about it. I would ask every business in Brevard County to, in the next 24 hours, contact your member of the Florida legislature, both the senators and House members, and make sure they understand, you've done everything humanly possible to keep your employees safe and your customers safe. You've even lost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars in the process. You shouldn't be sued, just because you've done the right thing. Just because somebody can make a few bucks doing a lawsuit doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. So, Marcia, I'm very concerned about a title. This has been well documented in the Wall Street Journal. Every general counsel in America is talking about it right now. And it's a real shame that, I wish all of us could stay united on focusing on safely reopening our communities. But unfortunately, one sector of our society has already made it clear that they plan to sue as much as they can. And it's a real shame. It's an American problem, and it's something we've all got to fix.
I did notice that is a component of the U.S. Chamber's,
Right.
thought on helping across the, nationwide perspective. So yeah, David, that's a great idea. David, one of our participants just asked, can we simplify contacting our representatives by putting together a link for all of us? So we will include that as part of the follow-up email. We will put the contact information into, for all of the Brevard delegation into that response email to this webinar.
Right. Thank you. Again, people need access to the courts. That's not what we're talking about. If a business has done something wrong, then sue them. What we're talking about is, 99% of businesses have done exactly the right thing. They shouldn't be sued for doing the right thing.
Beautiful. I'm scrolling through and there's some questions that I think are more tied to local, is Brevard's order going to expire at the same time? And so I think that's questions that maybe we can follow up and answer. So I don't see anything else other than a lot of people jumping in and talking about who's accessing PPE and making it available in Brevard. So that's great conversation. So Michael, I'm going to turn it back over to you for any final comments. Michael's shaking his head no at me.
Just thanks to Mark and Jerry for joining us. Really good information. Appreciate you making time.
Thank you.
I want to thank you guys. Thank Grant for working with us on the infrastructure. I know that he's back in the background there, keeping things running seamlessly. So I want to definitely take time to thank you guys and the entire Florida Chamber team for the work that you've been doing and the information that you've been bringing to us literally instantaneously. When it happens, you guys are on it and forwarding information, and it has made it absolutely a pleasure to work with you to be able to pass that information along to our communities as well. So I thank you very much.
Thank you all. Yep. God bless. Be safe. We're in this together.
All right. Thank you guys so much. And we'll see you again very soon for another webinar. Until that, be safe.